She took the house, the pension, the truck, and 41 years of my life. And when she walked out of that courtroom, she turned and smiled at me the way you smile at someone you've already forgotten. I was 67 years old, standing on the steps of the Brampton courthouse in January, and the cold coming off Lake Ontario felt personal. My lawyer, a decent man who had done his honest best, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "We can appeal, Norm." I shook my head. There was nothing left to appeal with. The judge had spoken. My wife and her boyfriend, my former financial advisor, a man who had sat at my kitchen table and eaten my wife's butter tarts, had won. But before I tell you how it ended, you need to know how it began. You need to understand what I built, what I loved, and what they took. Because only then will you understand what I found in a tin box under my father's workbench, and why it changed everything. My name is Norman. Everyone calls me Norm. I'm 69 now, and for most of my working life I was a pipe fitter out of Local 46 in Mississauga. I started on the tools at 19, worked my way up to foreman by 35, and by the time I took early retirement at 62, I had a pension that covered our needs, a paid-off bungalow in Burlington, a 32-foot Silverado I'd bought outright, and a marriage I believed in completely. My wife and I met at a curling bonspiel in Oakville. She was skip for her team, decisive and sharp, and she laughed at my terrible sweeping and bought me a beer after. We married within the year. I was 26. We had 2 kids, a son who works in Fort McMurray on the oil sands, and a daughter who lives in Kitchener with her husband and our 2 grandchildren. For 30 years I thought we were solid. The kind of solid that doesn't need to be talked about because it simply is. I should have noticed earlier. Looking back, the signs were all there, quiet and patient as cracks in a foundation. She started going to her financial planning meetings alone. That was the first thing. For years we'd gone together. Our guy had retired, and she found a new one through a friend at her book club. His name was Brendan. I met him once at a neighborhood barbecue. He wore a linen shirt in October and laughed too loudly at his own jokes. I didn't like him. I told myself I was being paranoid. She started coming home later. Not dramatically late, just enough. 40 minutes. An hour. Always with a reason that sounded logical. Traffic on the QEW. A stop at Longo's, a coffee with a friend. I worked long shifts for 40 years trusting people at their word, and I extended that same trust to her. That was my mistake. The moment I knew was a Tuesday in March. I came home early from my brother-in-law's place because the roads were getting bad, and I didn't want to drive the 401 in freezing rain. She wasn't expecting me until supper. I heard her on the phone in the kitchen, speaking quietly with the particular softness that people use when they don't want to be heard. "He won't know until it's done," she said. Then a laugh. Low and easy. I know. Just be patient. Once the paperwork is through, it's all ours." I stood in the front hallway in my boots, not moving. The refrigerator hummed. A Transport Canada plane passed somewhere overhead, and 41 years of trust caved in on itself like ice on a spring river. I didn't walk in. I backed out, quietly, and sat in my truck in the driveway for 2 hours, until the cold made my hands shake. Then I drove to the Tim Hortons on Appleby line, and sat in a corner booth with a double-double and tried to figure out what I was going to do. The next day I called a private investigator, a woman my union's legal plan had on referral. No nonsense, former OPP. I told her everything. She told me to say nothing at home, change nothing and let her work. 3 weeks later she called me into her office in Hamilton and laid photographs on the desk between us like cards. Brendan and my wife, restaurants in Oakville and Mississauga, a hotel near the airport, emails. She'd given me her password years ago for the travel account and never changed it, where the 2 of them discussed what they called the transition. My pension income, the equity in the house, the RRSP accounts. They had been planning it for 18 months. I confronted her on a Sunday morning. I put the photographs on the kitchen table next to her coffee. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she looked at me. "You were going to find out anyway," she said. Not sorry, just matter of fact. Like she was telling me the dishwasher needed a new part. "How long?" I asked. "Long enough," she said. That was all she gave me. The divorce filing came 10 days later. And that's when I discovered that Brendan was not just her boyfriend. He had been quietly, methodically restructuring our joint finances for over a year. He had moved funds, reclassified assets, and created a paper trail that made it look as though I had been financially controlling had mismanaged our retirement accounts through high-risk personal decisions, and had left her without proper financial security during our marriage. It was a masterwork of paperwork fraud. My daughter called me, and her voice was careful in a way that told me she'd already been spoken to. "Dad, Mom says you were gambling with the retirement money, that you had some kind of trading account she didn't know about." I told her that was a lie, that every account we had was jointly held and reviewed every January at our kitchen table. She said she needed time to think. My son didn't call at all. The family court proceedings in Ontario were the worst months of my life. Brendan had coached my wife thoroughly. She presented as a woman who had lived in financial anxiety for years, dependent on a husband who made all the decisions and kept her in the dark. Her lawyer was smooth, the kind of man who speaks in complete, careful sentences and never raises his voice. Every document my lawyer presented, theirs had a counter-narrative. Every witness I called, they reframed. The judge, and I say this without bitterness, because I believe she acted on what was presented to her, saw a 67-year-old retired tradesman with a union pension, a paid-off house, and a RRSP that Brendan had made look like a speculative mess, versus a woman who appeared careful and wronged. She divided the assets in a way that, on paper, looked equitable, but Brendan had already devalued everything on my side of the ledger. I walked out with a reduced monthly pension draw, no home, and legal fees that had eaten through my savings account like rust. I moved into a basement apartment in Stoney Creek. 1 bedroom, shared laundry in the hall, radiator that clanked all night. The building smelled like other people's cooking. I was 67 years old, and I couldn't afford a decent winter coat without thinking about it first. My friends from the union tried, at first. Phone calls, a few visits, offers of coffee. But when it became clear I had no money and no good news, the visits got shorter. People have their own lives. I understood. I didn't blame them. But understanding something doesn't make it hurt less at 2 in the morning, when the radiator clanks and the apartment is cold, and the only sound is a neighbor's television through the ceiling. There were bad nights, very bad nights, nights where I sat on the edge of that bed and thought seriously about whether any of it was worth continuing. I'm telling you that honestly, because I think people should be told that you can be a stubborn, practical, 67-year-old man who spent his whole life showing up and doing the work, and still end up in a place where the darkness feels permanent. It's not weakness, it's what sustained loss does to a person. What kept me going in the end was stubbornness, pure, unglamorous stubbornness. And something my father used to say, "You're not done until you say you're done." And Leekland men don't say it easy. My father, Archie Leekland, had died 8 years earlier at 84. He was a machinist from Cape Breton who'd come to Ontario in the 60s to work and built a life the only way he knew, quietly, carefully, $1 at a time. After he died, I'd taken a few things from his house before my sister and I sold it. His old logbook from the shop floor, a photograph of him and my mother at Peggy's Cove, and a metal tin, the kind that used to hold Christmas shortbread, that he'd kept on the shelf above his workbench in the garage. I had never opened it. It had a small padlock, and I'd never found the key. I put it on a shelf in my closet in Stoney Creek and forgot about it. 4 months after the divorce was finalized, I was reorganizing that closet, really just moving misery around, as you do, and I found the tin again. I looked at the padlock and thought about the small ring of keys I'd taken from my father's kitchen drawer, without really sorting through them. I dug the ring out of a shoebox. 3rd key. The padlock snapped open. Inside the tin was a Canadian Tire folding knife my father had carried for 50 years, a photograph of me at about age 10 holding a fish I'd caught at Baddeck, and an envelope, brown with age, sealed, with my name written on the front in my father's square, careful printing, and beneath the envelope, a bankbook, the old kind, the cloth-covered kind, from a credit union in Sydney, Nova Scotia. The last entry, written in ink, was dated 1987, a deposit of $200, bringing the total to $840. Credit unions like that didn't always die when their branches closed. Some had been absorbed. I stared at that bankbook for a long time. The envelope first. My father's letter was 2 pages, written on plain lined paper. He wasn't a man who spoke about feelings. Not to me, not to anyone. But he could write them, apparently, when he needed to. Norman, it began, not son. Just my name, which somehow made it feel more serious. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone and you went looking properly. Good. I was hoping you would. I want to tell you something I never said out loud because I wasn't raised to say it. I was proud of you every single day. The way you showed up, the way you worked, the way you raised your kids without making a fuss about it. In 1987, I opened an account at the Cape Breton Credit Union with money I'd saved separately over the years. Money your mother didn't know about and I didn't touch. Not because I was hiding it from her in a bad way. She knew in general, but I wanted it separate, protected, somewhere that couldn't be dipped into for emergencies or borrowed against. It was for you, for when you needed it most, not for when things were fine. I put in $200 that year and I arranged with the credit union manager to have it sit in a compound interest account I set up specifically for this. I told them my grandson, or son, whoever came, should be able to claim it with proper ID. I paid a fee to keep it structured. I don't know how much is in there now. I'm not good at the math, but compound interest is patient. 30 years is a long time. Use it to get back on your feet. Don't use it to be bitter. There's a difference between justice and revenge, and I want you to know which one our family stands for. I love you, Norman. I always did. I just was never taught how to say it while I was standing in the same room. Your dad. I sat on the floor of that closet and I cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was a boy. Not the quiet, controlled kind. The kind that comes from somewhere deeper than you usually let anything reach. The next morning, I called the number for what turned out to be the Atlantic Central Credit Union, which had absorbed the Cape Breton Credit Union's accounts in the mid-90s. After 2 transfers and a hold that lasted 22 minutes, I reached someone in member services who asked me for the account number from the bank book and my father's social insurance number, which I had on file. "Sir," she said, after a pause that went on long enough that I thought we'd been disconnected, "I'm going to need to transfer you to our special accounts department. This account is flagged as a legacy compound interest account." "How much is in it?" I asked. Another pause. "I'm not really supposed to. I mean, the account officer should review this with you properly. But I can tell you the account is active and the balance is. It's significant. Can you come into a branch in person with identification?" I drove to the Hamilton branch the next morning in my old Caravan, the only vehicle I had left after the divorce settlement. I brought my father's bank book, his death certificate, my own birth certificate showing his name as my father, and my driver's license. The account officer was a young man, calm and professional, who went very still when he pulled up the account on his screen. He excused himself, came back with a woman who introduced herself as the branch manager, and she sat down across from me with the careful posture of someone delivering news they're uncertain how you'll receive. "Mr. Lachlan," she said, "your father's account has been accruing compound interest since 1987. The original deposit was $847 at the point of the last recorded manual entry. He arranged a structured legacy account that rolled over automatically at our highest available rate through several institutional transitions. The current balance, as of this statement period, is—" She turned the screen to face me. I looked at the number. I looked at it again. I asked her to tell me if I was reading it correctly. $2.3 million, she said. 2,314,000 and some change. The room tilted. Not dramatically, just a quiet interior shift, like ice settling. "That's not possible," I said. "Compound interest over 37 years, Mr. Lachlan, at rates your father locked in during a period of very high Canadian interest rates. The 80s were exceptional in that regard, and with automatic reinvestment through every account transition. Our compliance team has already reviewed it twice because it's unusual. But it's correct. The money is yours." I didn't drive home right away. I sat in the parking lot on Main Street West and watched the city go about its business. A woman walked by with a stroller. A Canada Post truck idled at the light. A kid in a Leafs jacket argued with his phone. $2.3 million. From $840 million. From my father's careful, quiet stubbornness, I thought about what he'd written. "Don't use it to be bitter. There's a difference between justice and revenge." I knew which one I wanted. The first thing I did was nothing. That was the hardest part. I moved the funds, on the advice of a trust and estate lawyer I retained, a woman in Hamilton with a reputation for precision and no patience for shortcuts, into a properly structured account that was shielded under my name alone, with clear documentation of its origin as an inheritance. Brendan couldn't touch it. My ex-wife couldn't touch it. It didn't exist, as far as the world was concerned, until I was ready. Then I hired a different kind of lawyer. I found him through the Law Society of Ontario referral line, a man who specialized in financial fraud and professional misconduct. His name was George Abara, and he had a framed certificate on his wall from the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario, and the patience of someone who had spent 20 years watching people like Brendan think they'd gotten away with it. George listened to my whole story without interrupting. When I finished, he set down his pen. "What your financial advisor did," he said, "is a clear breach of his fiduciary duty, almost certainly fraudulent misrepresentation, and possibly criminal. If he manipulated your joint financial documents to present a distorted picture to the court, that's obstruction. I want every document you have." I gave him everything. The original statements, the emails from my wife's account, the investigator's report, the screenshots I'd quietly taken of our online accounts before the proceedings began because something had told me to. George spent 6 weeks building the case. He subpoenaed Brendan's client records through the FSRA complaint process. What came back was worse than I'd imagined, and better than I'd hoped. I wasn't the only one. Brendan had done versions of this to 4 other clients over 8 years. All of them older, all of them in the midst of marital dissolution, all of them left with less than they were owed, while assets quietly redirected toward people Brendan was connected to. 4 other people. All of them had given up because they'd run out of money to fight. George filed a formal complaint with the FSRA and a concurrent civil fraud action. He also passed the criminal portion to contact at the OPP's Financial Crimes Unit. I didn't tell my children. Not yet. I needed to know what was real before I asked them to reconsider anything. What I did instead, and this is the part that still makes me feel something when I think about it, was pay attention. I had an investigator make some discreet inquiries. My son up in Fort McMurray had been having trouble with a contractor who'd done shoddy work on his condo and was refusing to honor the warranty, a $14,000 dispute he didn't have the appetite to litigate. I contacted a consumer rights lawyer in Edmonton anonymously and arranged for them to reach out to my son and offer representation at no cost. The contractor settled within 3 weeks. My daughter and her husband in Kitchener were struggling with her youngest, my granddaughter, who had a learning assessment that their school board was refusing to fund. I made a donation to a family advocacy organization that assigned a specialist to their case. I never told them where it came from. I helped them not because I expected credit. I helped them because they were my kids, and because despite everything they were still struggling, and I was their father, and that doesn't switch off. 6 months after George filed his complaint, the OPP executed a search warrant on Brendan's offices in Oakville. His assistant called my ex-wife to warn her, apparently, because she called my daughter in a panic. My daughter called me, the first real call in almost 8 months. "Dad, what's happening? Mom says the police are at Brendan's office." "I know," I said. A silence. Did you do this?" "I did what I should have done from the beginning," I said. "I hired someone who knew what they were doing and I let the evidence speak." She didn't know what to say to that. "I have to tell you something," she said finally. Her voice had changed. The careful distance she'd been maintaining had cracked a little around the edges. When Mom told us about the accounts, about the trading, I didn't actually believe her, not completely. But I didn't know what else to do. He was always there, in every conversation. And she was so certain. "I should have called you. I should have." "You should have," I said, not harshly, just honestly. "But we can talk about that properly when there's time. Right now I just need you to know that it's going to be okay," she cried a little. I let her. My son called 2 days later from Fort McMurray. He didn't cry. He's more like me. He just said, "Dad, I'm sorry I didn't pick up the phone," and left the heavy silence of it sitting there between us until I filled it. "I know," I said. "Come home for Christmas. We'll talk." The formal proceedings took another 4 months. Brendan had retained a sharp criminal defense lawyer who tried several procedural delays, but the FSRA evidence was devastating. Contemporaneous records of account manipulation, internal notes, communications that showed deliberate misrepresentation to the courts. George presented it all methodically and without drama. The civil fraud judgment came first. Full restitution of the misappropriated assets, plus damages. The family court subsequently issued an order revisiting the divorce settlement in light of the fraud finding, which restored a significant portion of what I had lost. including a buyout equivalent on the family home. The criminal finding came 3 months after that. Brendan was convicted on 2 counts of fraud over $5,000 and 1 count of breach of fiduciary duty, sentenced to 32 months. He'll serve a portion of that, then parole. I know that seems light. George warned me it might be. The Canadian sentencing guidelines for white-collar crime are what they are. My ex-wife was not charged. There was insufficient evidence that she'd known the full extent of what Brendan was doing. She'd benefited, but the court found her more pawn than architect. I didn't push for more. That surprised some people. But George had said it, and my father had said it in different words. Know the difference between justice and revenge. She lost Brendan. She lost the house in the end when the settlement was revised. She is living in a rented condo in Hamilton now. I don't wish her well, and I don't wish her harm. I simply don't think about her very much anymore, which is the most honest way I can say it. The thing about getting your life back is that it doesn't feel the way you imagine it will when you're sitting in a cold apartment at 2 in the morning. You don't feel triumphant. You feel quiet, like someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time and finally, slowly, exhales. I bought a house. Not the one we'd had. I didn't want that house. I found a place near Dundas, a 2-story with a proper garage and a backyard that backs onto the escarpment. I put my father's workbench in the garage. His tin box sits on the shelf above it, next to his logbook. My son came for Christmas, which was the first time in 3 years. My daughter brought the grandkids, and we made a mess of the kitchen, and my son burned the bottom of the gravy, and my granddaughter took apart the nativity scene and reorganized it in a way that she found more logical, and it was loud and imperfect, and I kept having to step out to the garage on some pretense or another to collect myself. There was a conversation that happened after dinner, after the kids were in bed, and it was just the 3 of us adults at the kitchen table with tea. My daughter asked me how I'd survived the worst of it, the basement apartment, the nothing, the alone. I don't know exactly, I said. And then, your grandfather, not just the money, the letter, the fact that he'd thought far enough ahead to leave something in the dark for when I needed it. It reminded me that I came from people who didn't quit. My son turned his mug in his hands. He's a man of few words, like me. What did the letter say? The actual letter. I got up and got it from the drawer where I'd been keeping it. I read them the whole thing, including the last part about love and standing in the same room. My son looked at the table for a while after. My daughter looked at me. He sounds like you, she said. I had to get up and check something in the garage after that. I've done a few things with the money beyond recovering my own footing. There's a fund I set up, modest, run through a community legal clinic in Hamilton, that provides financial assistance to older Ontarians who are facing divorce proceedings involving suspected financial fraud and can't afford proper legal representation. George helped me structure it. The clinic has used it to support 11 people in the first year and a half. Some of them have won significant portions of their cases back. Others haven't, but at least they were heard properly. I spoke once, at the clinic's annual fundraiser, in front of about 60 people. Retirees, lawyers, social workers. I told them the short version of what happened to me. Afterward, a man about my age came up to me, shook my hand and said, I thought I was the only one. He wasn't. He isn't. That's the thing I keep learning. The FSRA has since used the Brendan case as a reference example in revised guidance for financial advisors working with vulnerable clients during family dissolution proceedings. George told me about it in an email, and I read it twice, and then I made a coffee and sat in the garage for a while. My father was a machinist from Cape Breton who never made a lot of money, but understood compound interest in the only way that counts. That small, careful things, left alone long enough, become something extraordinary. He wasn't talking only about the account. I'm sure of that now. I think about the night I sat on the edge of that bed in Stoney Creek, when it felt like there was genuinely no forward from where I was. I think about how wrong I was. Not because some miracle was waiting, but because I wasn't done yet. And the difference between a man who quits and a man who doesn't is rarely dramatic. Usually it's just getting up the next morning and doing the next small thing, because you're not ready to say you're done. My father knew that. He built it into the account. He built it into the letter. He built it into me, over 60 years, without either of us quite knowing it was happening. The garage smells like machine oil and sawdust and something older than both. In the winter, when the grandkids visit, I let them sit on the stool at the workbench, and I show them how to use a level, how to set a nail, how to measure twice. My granddaughter has a particular gift for patience that surprises me every time. I don't know what I'll leave behind, but I think about it now in ways I didn't before, when I was busy and comfortable and assumed the future was settled. Whatever it is, I want it to be the kind of thing that finds the person who needs it most, at the moment they need it, with a note that says something they should already know, but need to be reminded of. That's what my father gave me. Not the money, though the money mattered, and I won't pretend otherwise. What he gave me was proof that someone had thought ahead, and seen me, and believed I would find my way through. That is a harder thing to earn than $2.3 million, and a more valuable thing to leave behind.